All right, so we know from sorting the influence column that 16 people did not answer the question, does local news have influence on your community? Which is this question abbreviated as just influence. We know that 16 people didn't answer at all, but we don't know how many people answered 1, which corresponds to yes, local news has a lot of influence, or how many people answered 2, no, local news does not have much of an influence. If we want to find out how many people answered 1 and how many people answered 2, I accidentally erased something, so I just did Control Z to undo. If we want to know the answer, we will have to create a pivot table. So the first thing we want to do is click anywhere within our spreadsheet. Any of these cells are fine to click on. Then we click on data up here at the top again. And we can see that below some of the other options, there's an option for pivot table. So we click on pivot table, and we can see that because we clicked somewhere in the spreadsheet, it has already selected the entire spreadsheet for us. So we leave data range the way it is, and it says below insert to a new sheet. That's perfectly fine. We leave that the way it is, and then we click on create. Now you can see that I'm in a new pivot table view with an editor open on the right. If you ever see this disappear, this pivot table editor, for example, if you click away, the way to bring it back is to click anywhere within your pivot table, for example, this gray area, and it will bring back the pivot table editor automatically. So in order to find out how many people responded to the influence question, the first thing we need to do is add rows. And because we're interested in the influence question, we are going to add influence as our variable for rows. So this is basically a long list of all of the variables that we have in our data set, all of the column headers. And we are going to select influence. So again, I selected add and then influence. And what that did was it automatically put in each of the possible values for influence into this pivot table. So the possible values are number 1 for yes, it had a lot of influence, number 2 for no, it didn't have much influence, or 999 for missing data or no answer. Now we want to know how many people are in each of these categories. And to do that, we scroll down in our pivot table editor down to where it says add values. So we're going to go ahead and click on the add button next to values. And we're going to select the very first variable on our list, which is RESP ID, which stands for respondent ID. And that means the ID numbers of all of the survey respondents. We're selecting the ID numbers because we want to know the number of people, and each person has one ID number assigned to them. So we click on respondent IDs, and we can see now that we have this column that says sum of respondent IDs. This isn't actually helpful because if you add together all of the ID numbers, it doesn't mean anything. If you add together person number 5 and person number 10, the number 15 doesn't mean anything. Instead, we want to know how many people there are. We just want to know how many ID numbers there are. How many unique ID numbers exist that answered 1, and how many ID numbers answered 2. So instead of adding them together with sum, we're going to change the summarize by value over here in the pivot table editor, and we are going to click on the drop down. Right below sum, which is adding them together, we have the option that we want, which is count A. There are other options that would work okay, like just plain count or count unique, but count A is the most frequently used and it works fine for our case. So we're going to select count A, and now it has automatically updated to show how many ID numbers are answering each of these. So 297 ID numbers, or 297 people, said that yes, local news has a lot of influence. 324 people said no, local news does not have much of an influence. And like we already knew, 16 people did not answer at all. So let's go ahead and give this column a color so that we can refer to it. I'm going to give it the background color of blue. So now this is the blue column. Let's make that a little darker so it's easier to see. So here we have a blue column, and we can even rename it. We can say number of people who answered. Right? Great. I'm just going to make this a little wider. Number of people who answered. Great. So what if we're interested in the percentage? What percentage of people said that local news was influential? And what percentage of people said it was not influential? Well, to do that, we can add another column here. And to add another column, you just need to add values again. So we click this green button again next to values, add. And we're going to select the exact same variable, respondent ID. We're going to choose that one again. And you can see it went right to the default of using the addition of all the numbers, but that's not what we want. Instead, we want the same exact thing again, count A. So now we have two columns that look the same. We have the blue column, and let's go ahead and give this one a color. We have a purple column. Make it more purple. So the purple column and the blue column have the same values inside, but we're going to turn the purple column into percentage of the total. To do that, we are going to go over here to the right, and over here where we can see our new title, percentage of the total, we're going to change the option under show as. Instead of show as default, we're going to show as, and we're going to select in the drop-down percentage of grand total. If we click on percentage of grand total, we can see our column, our purple column, automatically updated. And now we know 46% of people who answered the Pew Local News survey said that local news is influential on their community, whereas a majority, 50.8%, responded no, local news does not have much of an influence. And then there's 2.5% that didn't respond at all. So now we have the answer to the question that we started with.